Can you put your bag there, just so we don't ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Please take a seat. Welcome. Those out in the hallway, please come join us. We'll be starting in just a moment. I'll see everyone. Good morning, and just checking you can hear me up the back there. Yep, great. Good morning. My name is Sandra Davey, and I am the lucky MC for the next 55 minutes or so. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Yugara Turrbal people of the Meanjin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also extend my respect to any elders, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that may be joining us either online or in the rooms today. Thank you everybody for joining us in what will be a really interesting session. I'm delighted to be emceeing this, and I'll welcome the panelists in just a moment. It's pretty tight. We've got 6 fantastic speakers and 55 minutes. So it's going to be an interesting job for me to keep everybody to time, but also to allow time for those of you that are joining us online. I will be monitoring chat if you have any questions. And of course, in the audience today, we hope we've got some time. We're really aiming to have time towards the end to engage with the audience. Each speaker will have a really tight 4 minutes, but all of them are experts in their field and bring a range of experience in internet governance. So I am sure they are able to stick to their time. First, I would like just perhaps one round of applause because there are 6 speakers. I'll introduce them and let you know a bit about who they are. On the far left in the room, we have Jordan Carter, who's joining us from auDA and is an Internet Governance and Policy Specialist. Anja Gengo from the United Nations Internet Governance Forum Secretariat. And that is I've just met the speakers. Boyoung is joining us from the Korean Internet Security Agency, and Boyoung, good morning, is joining us from online. Noelle Francesca de Guzman, apologies, from the Internet Society is sitting next to me here. Warm welcome. We have Paul Wilson from APNIC. Many of you will know him. Paul's been a long-standing contributor in this space. And joining us online as well, please welcome Amrita Chowdhury from the CCAOI, which we know as an internet advocacy organisation in India. Please join me in welcoming our panellists. The way we're going to run this is I'm going to hand to Jordan in just a moment, and he's going to set some context for the next 50-odd minutes. Each speaker will then get 4 minutes, and we will then open up to Q&A from both in-room and online. And I'm also going to give panellists a chance to summarise in 1 minute, would you believe, at the end. So that will really force them to be specific. So Jordan, without further ado, I'll like to hand to you to set us some context, please.
Thank you, Sandy, and good morning, everyone. Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Jordan. I am from the auDA.au Domain Administration, Internet Governance and Policy Director. And you know, one of the organizers of this session. This is about evolving the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance so that it can do what the label says for this event, help support the Asia-Pacific work through the next phase of the internet. And it is changing. I think we can observe that there will be ever more internet all the time, everywhere. You know, the satellite extension of connectivity means everywhere we go, we'll be able to be online. More and more people will be in the online world. And the internet will be having a deeper impact in our economic, social, and cultural lives. And we know also that new stacks of technology and applications will continue to be built on top of it. You know, the AI craze that's going on at the moment is a single example of new technologies that depend on the internet infrastructure to reach the people who want to use it. And so the internet governance system needs to adjust in response to these changes. And there are other forces driving changes as well. So I want to sort of provoke us all to think about a few points. These are generally derived from the Internet Governance Roadmap that auDA published a few weeks ago, which one of my colleagues will probably be able to pop a link in the chat. But if we think about those bigger problems of digital governance, if our internet governance system can't solve them, doesn't it mean we need to grow some new institutions that can? Or does it mean we need to change internet governance so it can tackle these questions? For internet governance, how do we broaden and deepen effective participation, both so it can actually deliver, so internet governance can do what internet governance needs to do, but also that it can be and be seen to be more legitimate than it is today. And how can we develop as a community in this IGF, in the global IGF to come, how can we develop a shared sense of how we actually want this model of internet governance to change? And it's timely to be talking about these things now because there are some global processes going on that could change the underpinnings of the way internet governance works. I'm talking about the WSIS Plus 20 review coming up in 2025 and the Summit of the Future with its Global Digital Compact stream that's coming up next year. The ministerial meeting to set the political direction of the Global Compact is about 3 weeks away. So it's a good time to be talking about this. Governments endorsed the current multi-stakeholder model of internet governance at the WSIS in 2005. And they endorsed it again subsequently, most recently in 2015 at the WSIS Plus 10 review. But there's no guarantee that they will endorse it again. What governments gave, in a sense, governments can take away. And so if we want to shape what they're going to do, we need to argue our case that an open, community, multi-stakeholder driven model of internet governance is the one that we need. I think it's the best one because of what it has delivered and because it makes sure that all of the key stakeholders get a real say in shaping the internet's future. But it isn't perfect. This model hasn't delivered to everyone's needs. It hasn't been a system where all of the necessary voices are heard. So that's why it needs to be improved, why it needs to change, to develop, and to grow. And those of us who support this model need to listen deeply and carefully to those who do not support it. Because it isn't simply the case that people who don't think multi-stakeholder is great are wrong or silly or haven't thought about it properly or are just being annoying, which is the way I heard it described once. They have reasons for their stances. There are reasons that some countries prefer UN systems, and there are some advantages to those systems. But I just don't think those advantages outweigh what we've got today. If we fail to renovate and build the legitimacy of the next version of a multi-stakeholder governance system, the alternative is United Nations diplomats in the bubble of New York doing it for us. I don't know about you, but that doesn't leave me feeling very confident about the future of this system, which is so important to our communities all around the region and all around the world. So we need to argue for and articulate an inclusive system of internet governance and cooperation, I think is what Paul might call it. And I hope that we do some of that work today in this session. Thank you, and back to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Jordan. We've got some wonderful context to kick us off. The way I'd like to run it is we're going to go in-person, remote, in-person, remote, and alternate that way. And we'll kick off with Anja. Would you like me to time you or give you a 4-minute warning? Or you time yourself? You're okay?
You can time me, yes,
Okay,
and interrupt me. It's not my skill to be brief. But yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me well. It's a great pleasure again to engage in a dialogue with all of you and wonderful colleagues that are on my left and right side, also online, on this very important topic. And maybe I can start on a point of change. So in preparing for this panel, I looked a little bit through archives of the IGF, which is the office that serves the project where I work. And if you look at 2006, then you will see that the IGF at the time was announced by the Secretary General Kofi Annan. And Mr. Secretary General at that time called the internet as the greatest, I'll maybe quote, agent of dramatic change, and maybe the greatest instrument of progress. The overarching theme at that time was Internet for Development. Today, almost basically 2 decades after initial visits and going through 18 years of the IGF, we still speak about similar concepts. We may not speak about the development as such, but we speak more about sustainable development, which means that we're more focused. We still speak about the internet and digital technologies, related services and tools as a great opportunity for all of us to thrive and to have basically better lives and to reach the sustainable development. So in that sense, we haven't seen that change, but where we are seeing really a change are, first of all, the governance models, the governance framework. At the time in 2006, there was the IGF as the very first forum that put together, just as the announcement at the time said, 2 different blocks. One is more formal, government member states led, with the non-governmental sector within a traditionally multilateral intergovernmental organization. Today, multi-stakeholder model is much more present also within the UN system as such, but also broadly speaking. And speaking about the point of bubble that Jordan mentioned, I can share the experience of the IGF Secretariat. As we speak from that quote unquote bubble in Geneva with, for example, missions, more and more we speak about the concept of the national IGFs and their participation in a multi-stakeholder framework in their countries. And that's probably the biggest change since 2006, more than 160 national and regional IGFs, and the application of the multi-stakeholder model, not as mandated by someone for a particular group of people, but really organically emerged and applied on a local level by people for people. And I think nothing speaks in favor better about the brighter future for the multi-stakeholder model, for preserving it and maintaining it, just as processes that you are running here. And I hope that maybe on that note, we can continue later. Certainly, the Global Digital Compact is something within the United Nations system that is gaining momentum. It's been welcomed by the member states, but also by other stakeholder groups. And many of you will know that within the United Nations, many multi-stakeholder consultations were placed to understand what different stakeholders think before the member states engage in a process to bring clarity on what the GDC will be about and if it will be agreed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Perfect start to the session. Thank you. Appreciate it. Boyoung, we'd like to hand to you and welcome.
Hello, good morning. This is Boyoung Kim. I'm working for KISA policy team in KISA, Korea Internet Security Agency. Today, I'm going to share how Korean government supports internet governance in local and globally. The Korean government places a great emphasis on the importance of participating from various stakeholders in internet governance and is actively support diverse group and activities. We have Internet Address Policy Committee and the Korea Internet Governance Alliance consisting of various stakeholders, including civil society, industry, academia, to facilitate policy development and vibrant discussion related to internet governance. Also, KISA supports holding KISA annually to provide an open platform for discussion on internet governance issues. KISA started in 2012, so we have like more than 12 years now. Second, to enhance the understanding of the essence and value of the internet among future generation, KISA organize each project floor more systematically from school to the real field. We call it as the STP-based Internet Governance Capacity Building Program, which is studying at school, training with experts, and participating in real fora. As a first step, KISA developed the Internet Governance curriculum and textbook that can be used in the school, in the university. Students can acquire theoretical knowledge through Internet Governance curriculum at school and share their idea with the peer through the research lab and youth group. And KISA also supports fellowship program for youth to experience APrIGF, IGF, and ICANN. This is the third year that KISA supports Internet Governance Research Lab, which is called as EG at IG Expert Group at Internet Governance. This year, we have over 40 students from 8 universities. We encourage them to study first at the school or research lab so that they are ready to fully experience in APrIGF when they finally meet people from other regions. Also, together with professors, KISA is developing specialized teaching material for university course. This year, we will publish 3 series of books. First is Internet Governance Principle. Second is Freedom from Digital Surveillance. Third is Directions for Literacy Education on ChatGPT in the context of Internet governance. We will make a series of books that can contain the today's issue. And also lastly, since 2016, KISA has been hosting APrIGF, Asia Pacific Internet Governance Academy, in collaboration with ICANN. APrIGF is the capacity building development workshop focused on the Internet governance that is targeted at youth leaders from Asia Pacific region. Over the past 7 years, more than 340 individuals have completed the program, and 25% of students are actively involved in Internet governance activities across the region. As a government workers, I will keep working on raising awareness of Internet governance for the broader group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Boyoung. We will pass now to Noelle.
That's very good. Oh, is this on? Is this on? This is on. So let me time myself. Okay. So Jordan had posed some compelling questions. So I thought I'd have a go at speaking to, well, one of them. I think that's all time permits. And point to so Jordan asked whether we might be needing new processes and new institutions to address maybe emerging issues. And I would like to point to several initiatives that are rather new that are doing that and are making an attempt at being multi-stakeholder. So one example is the Freedom Online Coalition, and we have another example closer to home, which is the Christchurch Call initiative, which Jordan is also involved with. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the Christchurch Call because that's the one I'm more familiar with. So the Christchurch Call was set up following the Christchurch terrorist attack in New Zealand back in 2019. And it was initiated by governments. So it's actually, in a way, government-led by the French and the New Zealand government. And since then, I think as of the last count, there's like 58 governments participating. There's an increasing number of service providers, including the platforms that we know that are there. And there's an advisory network that's made up of civil society and technical organizations. So this is one example of a new kind of mechanism that is set up to address an emerging concern, which is the spread of terrorist content online. And it has teething problems. It's quite new, but it is somewhat making progress towards what it wants to achieve, creating crisis protocols, for example, that are now in use. And this is just to point to kind of examples that it is possible, it's still possible for us to get creative in having new processes that would address emerging concerns without everything having to go under the auspices of the UN. Of course, it's possible to, we need coordination to avoid duplication of efforts for one, but there's that as well. So there is other things to explore. So I'll stop there. I think I'm almost time up. Yeah.
Excellent. You're leaving plenty of time for discussion and questions. So I think at this point, we'll hand over to you, Paul.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning and good day to everyone in the room this morning. Thanks for being here. A useful place for me to start, I think, is to talk about a recent blog post about the GDC, the Global Digital Compact, that was published. And the headline chosen by the editor was a top-down attempt to minimize the role of the technical community, which was pretty blunt, actually, but kind of accurate in terms of what we were talking about. I joined and co-authored that one with Sally Costerton, the interim CEO of ICANN, and John Curran, the CEO of ARIN, which is the equivalent of APNIC in North America. And you can find it on the ICANN or APNIC websites and read it in more detail, but just briefly, the point was to respond to the UN tech envoy, Amandeep Gill, who's produced a policy brief proposing a new digital cooperation forum. And he advocates a new tripartite model for digital cooperation with just three components, which are the private sector, governments, and civil society. And he mentioned this at the EuroDig, European Regional Internet Governance Dialogue meeting earlier this year. And we felt a strong need to not let it pass without comment. The problem we have is that the technical community is missing. And in fact, the tech envoy suggested that it is incorporated into civil society. And so Sally, John, and I wanted to address it, not to let it pass, because it's very clear that we absolutely support civil society as an integral component of the multi-stakeholder system. But we absolutely don't believe that the tech community can be simply absorbed or regarded as a part of it. In terms of history, in this blog post, we referred to the agreements made at WSIS, the Tunis agenda, the WSIS plus 10 review, where all of the different recognised stakeholders and their roles, including the technical community, were recognised by the UN. I always like to point out that the multi-stakeholder system was not invented by WSIS, by governments, by the Working Group on Internet Governance. It was discovered by them. It was discovered as they looked at what was the success of the internet, and what was the key to the success, and the multi-stakeholder model, as they documented it, including its stakeholder groups, was identified as a critical part. It was a discovery, not an invention. And so that was continued through, of course, the IGF itself, which recognises the technical community very seriously through the allocation of seats on the advisory group, amongst other things. So I guess some might think about or wonder why we need to go back to a history of 1 or 2 decades, nearly 2 decades, to still today. And I would say we absolutely do. It has been nearly 20 years since WGIG. And in that time, the internet's grown from well under 1 billion to well over 5 billion users. Jordan was speaking about this. That's just one measure. There's been a growth of applications of social media, of e-government, e-commerce, bandwidth, the sheer volume of data, the overall value of the internet to individuals has increased massively. And I think the multiplication of the internet success was successful back in 2003. Then it's the multiplication of that success since then. It really is inestimable. And as Jordan said, that's going to continue. Most recently, I think an undersung success of the internet was to support the entire global COVID response and recovery. We took the internet for granted in spite of really unprecedented pressure for its performance and growth and availability. And that the fact is it supported a global societal change towards remote work and education. And I actually feel it deserves a Nobel Prize for its performance through that time. The point is, all of this happened, this last 20 years happened under the continuing and evolving, but the current multi-stakeholder system with the technical community and civil society as essential, recognised critical components. And so I think the burden of proof and justification for a fundamental change, which was certainly not an evolutionary change to the internet governance system, really must be heavy, and we don't see that. The internet and its uses are going to continue to evolve, probably even faster. And we do have to reflect on how the multi-stakeholder approach needs to adapt, but we'll insist that the technical community has and will play a critical role in that. And for the GDC to achieve any success, it needs to really embrace and commit to a multi-stakeholder model that has been documented, recognised, proven, and that, frankly, many of us have fought to develop, preserve, improve, and protect. And changes to that beyond consensual evolution really do deserve scrutiny that needs to be transparent and inclusive, and not handed down from the top as our editor described it in the blog post. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Paul. Amrita, we know you've got a couple of technical issues, but I think you're back. If you do drop out, no problem. We can go to Q&A and I can bring you back again. But let's try and hand over to you, Amrita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope I am audible. And I would like to respond first to Jordan's question that do we need another platform? The thing which we are looking at is we are witnessing a growth in multilateral and multi-stakeholder platforms for discussion, but unfortunately most stakeholders cannot take part in many of these forums and do not have a voice. Typically the example of GDC, which is supposed to be a multi-stakeholder discussion, but the multi-stakeholder is also defined as per UN terms. There are questions about where all a stakeholder can participate, because it is, after all, the nations who would be deciding. Where would civil society be speaking, or where would be technical community speaking? And if you look at the process, most of the countries are also not having the discussions within their fora. So it is important. And if you look at Asia Pacific, not all countries are at the same level of development. So the conversations need to happen, even if they are different at different levels. The requirements of countries and the people are different. So there has to be platforms where such discussions happen. And rather than reinventing the wheel, the IGF, which is a UN-created structure where we have different stakeholders coming and discussing, and even the NRIs, for example, APrIGF could be a point where such discussions happen, because discussions can happen freely. These could be a sounding board for even any kind of structures, which, any kind of more developments which are needed. For example, the IGF is not perfect, but the EGM, which had happened last year, March, had some points which were, recommendations to improvise the IGF. So IGF could go to the next level, version 2.0 or 3.0, with certain changes, and it could take care of a lot of things which the new Digital Cooperation Forum aspires to do. So I think rather than reinventing the wheel, it would be worthwhile to upgrade the existing structures to perform better and address more issues. So I will stop at there.
Thank you so much. I think that's given us plenty to think about, and we have quite a decent amount of time for audience participation, questions. So those of you online, I can see a question coming through now, but I might encourage any of you in the audience here to raise your hand, and I will kick off, I think, with Kylie, who's posted a question online. I know she's encouraging questions to be posted online. So there you go. How about anyone in the audience? Would anyone like to kick off the conversation? We have a question from the gentleman with the yellow hat on, and we have a roving mic. So we just wait. And if you could let us know who you are and where you're from, that for the record, that would be great.
So my name is Alexa Pendoshte. At the moment, I'm the acting president at Linux Users Victoria. This is more a general question that in IGF, do we make conclusions or intentionally not making any conclusion about the topics that are discussed? Is IGF in general a forum for that, including this topic?
I think that was, if I try and interpret, I'm thinking about the idea of a forum for decision makers, not decision making. So there's more dialogue and discussion versus outputs. Is that where you were going with that? And could we comment on that?
Thank you. So it's a very interesting conversation. And I'm wondering whether this opens up a discussion that if I know people who have comments later, they can put their inputs in, and then the conclusion is made further down the track, or IGF discussions are for concluding those discussions that have been happening prior to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I actually like the term you're using, not decisions, but conclusions. And I think there's a difference. The mandate of the IGF certainly is not to make any decisions. It's not a decision-making forum. It's a forum where all stakeholders as equals will engage in a dialogue on the issues they find relevant. But I think, yes, you are very much right. There needs to be a point after rounds of discussions and dialogues. And certainly the IGF tries with its stakeholders to ensure that there are concrete outputs produced at the end of an IGF cycle through various streams. So for example, that means also through the intersessional work, but also at the annual meeting following the reporting of all session organizers, we're looking through thematic tracks what has been said. So what are the points that are emphasized in terms of the agreements, disagreements, what could be the potential way forward. So that's something that the IGF has been working for the past couple of years, especially to ensure that it is action-oriented, but also output-oriented. And maybe visiting the IGF website, you can see the nature of those messages. It has its evolution, just as the digital technologies and the narratives around applicable policies do have their evolution, and I think definitely it will continue evolving. And it's very much dependent on what you think it should be, and including the form on those conclusions you mentioned.
Thank you. Well, we'll go to Paul, but just to let Marita and Boyoung, if you want to participate in the conversation, I'll look to you. I don't know if you can see me looking to you, but raise your hand so I know to pass to you. But we'll pass to Paul, and other panelists, please feel free to just riff on a previous panelist.
Yeah, thanks. It is a good question. As a past member of the MAG, the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group at IGF, I well recall a lot of discussion about outcomes, outputs, what is the legacy from each IGF meeting that can be handed on, etc. And I just, so it's an issue. It's been an issue across the entire IGF system, I'd say, that's been tackled in different ways. But I just wanted to mention particularly here that one of the innovations of the Asia Pacific Regional IGF is what's called the synthesis document, which is a collaborative, collective effort, and it becomes an output from this meeting that's discussed in the town hall sessions at the end of each of the days. So you may have seen some of those sessions, but that document is open for contribution, for editing, not just during the course of this week, but for some weeks afterwards. And that becomes the important kind of artifact from this meeting as a collective consensus synthesis of what's gone on in the past few days. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Thanks.
So the question there is, can we take that document proactively back into our community groups and other organisations?
Of course. Yes, that is the point. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rita.
Yes, thank you. And just adding to what Paul mentioned, this is a criticism with IGF always faces, that there is no straight cut recommendations which comes out, but messages, reports, etc. However, it is a double-edged sword. Many governments and many people may not speak openly if you have concrete solutions coming from, because there would be a chance of slight censorship from certain governments of what messages come in. So I think having platforms where you can have more conversations and having messages coming out may make sense.
Thank you. We have no questions emerging in chat. I can't believe this. We have a question right up, the two questions, excellent, right up the back. Just state your name, please.
Hello, I am Deborah from Tika Foundation in Indonesia. So based on I have to make a disclaimer, amateur observation on internet governance. I have a lot of concern regarding the lack of awareness of the dangers or the adverse impacts of internet fragmentation on the side of policymakers, governments in our country. So my observation is there's a lack of awareness of what internet fragmentation means for access to internet and also the use of internet in our country on the side of policymakers. What I would like to understand is how have multi-stakeholder forums like IGF, for example, but also multi-stakeholder governance mechanisms which are implemented like in forums like ICANN, like RIRs and so on and so forth, inform the government in their language about these impacts on the global connectivity. Because the trend, as we can see right now, is that internet fragmentation occurs at different layers of internet stack, not only the legal, not only at the legal layer, but also a lot of the shutdowns. For example, we can say that a lot of internet shutdowns are part of efforts from the government to conduct internet fragmentation at the technical layer. And this has been conducted in recent years, even without court adjudication, for example, and this has been a trend. So I wonder, how have multi-stakeholder forums like this been useful in informing policy makers about these issues? Because I feel that it is just the technical community and civil society which are aware about these and are concerned about this. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if we kick off with Noelle, and by all means other panelists build on.
So I can speak a little bit about what's going on in the in international fora, and then maybe what the Internet Society is doing, because we are doing work on fragmentation currently. So there has been some increased take-up and awareness of fragmentation, including in multilateral fora. For example, the outcome document of, so the declaration rather, of the digital ministers this year at the G7 explicitly referred and opposed internet fragmentation. But I think one of the challenges in stakeholders rallying around or against internet fragmentation is the lack of consensus of what internet fragmentation is, and whether it's desirable or not, because some stakeholders do think that to some extent it is desirable. So what the Internet Society has been doing is, rather than define what fragmentation is to take a use case approach to fragmentation. So how does it manifest concretely? Through regulation, through policy developments, etc. And we have a framework called the Internet Way of Networking framework, but also a toolkit for assessing what the impact is of a certain event or a certain policy development to the internet, and the qualities and the principles of the internet that we would like to foster.
Yes, I could just very briefly, basically, I can just confirm what Noelle said, but the concept of internet fragmentation emerged in the past 2 years, especially in the discourse of the IGF, and we've been addressing it through a dedicated institutional work stream. It's called the Policy Network on Internet Fragmentation. And I do understand Deborah's concern that maybe you see sometimes these discussions as dominated by non-governmental sector. But in fact, it's not. When you look at the statistics, especially participation statistics, when you look at the composition of the multi-stakeholder advisory group, of the leadership panel of the IGF, participation in that policy network on internet fragmentation, then you'll see there's a solid balance between the stakeholder groups. Of course, civil society is just speaking from a multidisciplinary point of view, the largest group, and it just gathers most of the disciplines. I think that's just reasonable to expect. But we do have a good cooperation and good participation from the majority of the member states. So at the IGF, you have stakeholders coming from around, on average, 160 or over 170 countries. Many of them are governments, and they do listen and they do participate. So that's the purpose of the IGF, actually, to share good practices, to inspire policymakers to make informed decisions. What we are focused in the past couple of years, since 2019, is the legislative part. So the legislators, we are seeing that the regulation has been changing quite a lot in terms of the landscape. Concrete laws, rules of behaviors are emerging. If you look at the AI, we now have some statistics say over 40 countries having national legislation or introducing it. Just 5-6 years ago, we spoke about the very few. So things are very much changing, and we really need multi-stakeholder discussion processes for a dialogue before these decisions are made, because that may lead us to risk of fragmentation from a normative point of view, that you have different way to regulate something that is transnational and just of global nature.
Thank you. Paul, there's a question online that I suspect is directed at you. Did you want to make a brief comment there, or can I go to this technical question?
I'd like to make a brief comment about fragmentation.
Yep.
It is a very difficult term. It's one word for many different things, which is fine, but it means that if we want to be practical about fragmentation, what it means and how to address it, we've got to be quite specific about what we're talking about. So I think everyone has got some idea of the internet being divided into multiple layers, and there's an infrastructure layer, there are applications, there are even regulations on top, and you can have fragmentation for better or worse at any of those layers. You can have fragmentation at different times, geographically specific or not. It really taken as a whole, it needs to be seen as a quality or a set of qualities. In fact, there can be some deliberate fragmentation, particularly at the technical layers, for the sake of efficiency and operation of the network. But I just wanted to point out that I think this is a good example, if I need to say a little more about the concern about civil society and the technical community, is that it's about the layers. And the internet for the technical community was always the internet layer, the infrastructure layer. Quite specifically, an internet address is an address within that infrastructure layer. And that's really where the technical community does its work. It's about making sure that traffic can go from point to point, that domain names can be resolved, that standards can be developed within that internet layer that serve applications and applications of and functions of the internet. And so that's one view. A broader view of the internet is kind of everything, and it's a very important holistic view that tends to be a more civil society view, or the view of governments and civil society, and it is a different internet. The fragmentation that we're talking about in those two internets is a very different thing, and I think that, sort of practically speaking, is one of the reasons why we don't feel that you can put all of this stuff in one room, in one bucket, and try and sort it out. That we do need some texture and structure in the system. Thanks.
You may have addressed a little bit of what John online has posed, and that is regarding the neglecting of the technical community. Has there been any stated reason for this proposed change? And does anyone suspect any different real reason for the proposed change? Thank you, Jean.
No, no, and no.
No and no. Jordan.
Could I just add a couple of thoughts on that? Shortly after the blog post came out, there was the Amandeep Gill was speaking at the Caribbean IGF, and he used quite different language, which was an interesting shift towards a more multi-stakeholder point. But one thing I want to say about this around the neglect of the technical community, is we keep, if Paul sort of made this intriguing contribution before that the governmental system discovered multi-stakeholder internet governance, it didn't create it. And that was at the time a compelling story that they bought into to leave it alone. And it may be that we now need to tell that story again. But if we're going to tell that story again for the 2020s, the technical community needs to be a leading voice in telling that story. And it's wonderful that you and Sally and John collaborated on that blog post. It would be much more wonderful if a few other IR leaders' names had been on it, and if ISOC's name had been on it as well. Because 10 or 15 years ago, you'll remember the Montevideo statement process. A vibrant, deep-seated, engaged collaboration between the leaders of the technical internet community meant there was a shared set of ideas and arguments available to advocate for the open internet and also to shape the governance framework. And I want to make a call out to encourage and welcome your role in having started doing that here, and to shout out to anyone from those other organizations who's listening to get on that train and get collaborating again, because we need to be making that case in these UN processes as brightly and positively and effectively as we did 10 or 20 years ago to keep the opening for our community. So we can be annoyed that they seem to be trying to abolish us, but let's tell the massively positive story about why it's great to have us in there and what we can offer.
Thank you. I think we had another question up the back. Did the woman want to? Oh, got one down the front. Oh, no, where am I? Where am I going? Oh, sorry, he's at the microphone as well. Oh, I was I was going in order, so I apologize. We should have gone there, but we'll go you because you're right in front of me.
Thanks, Anja.
Please.
I actually wanted to build on, let's say, the point that that Paul and Jordan were making is that when you listen to the conversations here, and I'm very glad we're having the session kind of towards the end of APrIGF, I think it also begs the question of what do we consider still internet governance? Because I mean, I was taking a little bit, let's say, taking notice of, let's say, your opening remarks, Jordan, where you said, I don't want UN diplomats to talk about internet governance and kind of design things for us without our input or our consideration, which I think is a fair point. Which is a fair point if you consider, I think, internet governance to be really about how to protect kind of that core, almost kind of the technical layer of that internet. But if you look at internet governance and all the topics we discussed over the past few days here, I think you cannot but agree that there is a role for the multilateral system. When you talk about sustainable development goals, that's a UN multilateral initiative. So I think that brings me to the point that I think multi-stakeholderism is kind of a blessing and a curse in and of itself. Because yes, it's a blessing when you want to, let's say, create that rough consensus and you want to, let's say, get the community behind some of the technical, non-political things. But it's a curse if that becomes kind of a place where you can kind of discuss everything and all related to the internet, which I think is a situation where we're kind of landing at the moment here in the region, here nationally in Australia, but also globally. So do we need, let's say, to go back to kind of what's the core of what we mean by internet governance or governance of the internet? And does that also require this community to be more selective in what is within scope and what's out of scope? Because if everything is within scope, you cannot exclude, let's say, the big bodies of the UN, where lots of, I think, countries represented here today have great stakes in there from that conversation.
Thank you. Who would like to kick off? I'm just checking with Amrita and Boyoung. Let's start with Amrita.
Thank you so much. And that's an interesting question. If we look at how technology and digital is, it is cross-cutting. Internet governance was just limited to technology, but today, since everything is cross-cutting, there is overlap. So yes, these forums need to discuss a lot of things. If you're discussing sustainability here, doesn't mean that UN has no role, because that was a mandate which came in. But at the end of the day, it is all the stakeholders who actually have to deliver or buy in to those, whatever the governments have decided, else things will not run. Just mere governments would not be able to do so. So multilateral would definitely there, but multi-stakeholderism also has to involve, primarily because many times when decisions are made at the UN level, you will see blocks of countries. It is also political. And many times even the citizens of the country itself may not have the buy-in. So if you want something to work, or if you want a nuanced approach, even countries need to take in what the ground level realities are, or what people think. Simple example, rules are made for children, but children are never considered. In many countries, rules are made to protect women, but no women are there in the panel. So if some multilateral forum is making decisions on our behalf for citizen welfare or business flourishment, the business or the citizens or even the technical community needs to be there. So you can't have a 0-1 game. There is a gray area, but I think both the systems have to thrive, but you have to understand what is happening at the ground level. And for that, you need the multi-stakeholder with the good, bad and ugly.
Noelle and yeah, we'll go Noelle and Jordan, then we'll bring this to a close.
Thank you. So a few things. I think the points that Bart raised are valid. So a lot of, I mean, to be very blunt about it, a lot of users don't care about the internet, the technical infrastructure. They care about the services that they interact with. And a lot of our discussions, if we want to be inclusive, that would mean addressing what people are concerned about. Our concern at the Internet Society when it comes to multilateral bodies is scope creep. So when it comes to content regulation, for example, there is now suggestions of interfering with how infrastructure providers operate. So, for example, asking Cloudflare to be involved in blocking specific types of content, which it cannot do. It can block, swaths of IP addresses, which would not be good for any of us. And in our involvement in UN meetings, we have, we feel like we are constantly pushing back against the UN just trying to have its hand on everything. But I agree that we shouldn't include them. We shouldn't exclude them, rather, even in technical discussions. And so in Internet Society, for example, we have a policy track at the IETF because we do feel that they should be aware and they should be involved about, well, at least they should understand how standards are developed, because that's a way of engaging with them. And that's a way of making them aware that, these are the processes in place and they work.
I'm trying to be really quick, but it's a good point to raise. I think one of the things I keep remembering is that internet governance, multi-stakeholder fashion, does include governments, and they are an essential part of the mix because they have to then go away and legislate. So that we want them to be informed by these processes. It's not a matter of leaving them out. And it's also inevitable, though, these broader digital governance questions that governments have to get involved, because often they need to be solved by regulation and legislation, and because there are really tricky decisions about what the public interest is. And that's absolutely the territory of governments to define that on behalf of the people who live in their countries. What we need, I think, in the system is enough attention on the technical layer to make sure that it can keep developing. And a great way for the insights of that technical layer to be brought into the broader digital policy space without losing enough focus on the technical side of things. It needs to be a two-way flow. The technical dialogues and the policy dialogues need to inform each other, which is sometimes what the IGF system is helpful to deliver, but it also needs to deal with the technical governance questions.
Thank you, Jordan. We need to start wrapping up. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us their sort of closing thoughts. And if I can be a little provocative, I think we we all acknowledge that the multi-stakeholder model and the systems and processes that all of us in this room do fundamentally believe in, we all acknowledge that the model's under threat. I think many of us have acknowledged that we'd prefer to keep the ones we've got and iterate and improve and evolve. But I would like to provoke us into thinking, how do we move beyond acknowledging towards action? And each of the panelists have got some thoughts, I suspect, on how do we move into action. Paul's already spoken about raising awareness through the blog. And so I'd like to provoke the panelists in thinking about that and give each of you literally 1 minute. And we're going to go in reverse order. So I'm going to start with Amrita, and then we'll just without me intervening, hand to Paul. So Amrita, over to you, 1 minute.
Thank you. So what we would suggest is have more conversation. That's one, within the region. That's important. Second is, if, for example, taking the GDC and if we want the IGF to move to the next level, perhaps we need to look at what the recommendations of EGM are and see if it can, take care of the digital cooperation from what it is aspiring, and, make that transition and show it to the co-facilitators or others that, look, this is a platform which can take care of what your concerns are with these changes. Thanks.
The technical community doesn't feel neglected. That's a sort of emotive word. We don't need approval, but what we think is very important is that the technical community is understood. And I'm not just talking about a few organizations here. I'm talking about communities of thousands of professionals and thousands of organizations, those who have built and continue to build and run the infrastructure. So it's important that be understood. And I want to say again, I see the same importance in civil society. There's not a hierarchy here. One of the things that I think I really appreciate Jordan's point before about the Montevideo statement, which was a rare kind of coming together in an impactful way by a group of very different, diverse organizations. But I think we do need to do more of that. And we also need, I think, to have some more inter-stakeholder dialogue. And just today started to talk about the possibility of technical community, civil society coming together for more mutual understanding across that divide of positions and priorities and so on and so forth. So there's not a sense at all, and I can say here and now, there's not a sense of priority or value, but just of understanding and appropriate structure. Thank you.
Okay. I do feel, and I don't think I'm the first one to say this, that we need a compelling narrative. We need a concrete vision of where we want to get to with internet governance, especially with all the issues that are surrounding us. And we do have frameworks in place to guide us and to ground this vision. And of course, the one that I can think of is the one that the Internet Society produced. I'm so sorry. So that is, we have what we call the Internet Impact Assessment Framework, which is a toolkit that's available in the website, in the Internet Society website. And basically, it articulates the principles that underpin the design of the internet and the processes that govern the internet, bottoms up, decentralized, etc. So it gives a strong rationale for these processes and for these principles as a kind of a very basic necessity for preserving the value of the internet for future generations. And it also gives us something to aspire to. So when we talk about open, global, secure internet, what do we actually mean? So part of this framework is actually to qualify what makes the internet open. What are the qualities that make the internet global? So I invite you to please have a look, and maybe that's one of the starting points that we can use.
Thank you. We will go to Boyoung and then to Anja.
Yeah, lastly, I would like to share that KISA as a member of APTLD, which is another big part of the technical community, and also as a host country of the coming members meeting, proposed to release the member statement on how CCTLD registry can contribute for the future of the internet. This statement is developed with several CCTLD registry and also includes the needs for the capacity building for youth and policymakers and civil servants. I think sharing what we learned from how we start the internet infrastructure layer is very important to shape the next phase of the internet. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this community worked hard for the past 2 decades to create something that was probably unimaginable to the majority 2 decades ago. And my message would be to continue nurturing and owning that sense of ownership and belonging to a network for something that you worked hard. And yes, maybe the decisions are made by few, but checks and balances are with you as a collective force through the mechanisms that you created. And nurturing the stakeholder engagement, strengthening it through the national, regional IGFs, through various capacity development initiatives that exist, globally speaking, is probably the best way for us to spend our energy to make sure that we have a say in what the internet governance or digital cooperation will look like now and tomorrow.
Really quickly, 43 seconds. I endorse Paul's point about inter-sector collaboration. Technical community and civil society have done great things together. Sharing perspectives and helping shape this governance debate together is a really strong point. The other thing we can all do is talk to our governments about these UN processes and emphasize the importance to them of keeping a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance and urging them to get the UN processes to be more open and inclusive as well, so we can have our voices truly heard in that debate. I think that's some things we can follow up with.
Thank you so much, Jordan. We've got 7 seconds to spare. I just think that's magical. Thank you, panelists. You've just done an amazing job. I hope that particularly the last bit or the whole bit, but the last bit has really sparked some ideas in you around how can we progress this? How do we take action? I don't even need to summarize because it's kind of all been said. So I'd like each of us to say thank you very much to the panelists for their participation today, and thanks very much to the audience. I was going to run over a bit. Morning tea.